now change pace a little with a discussion with some amazing people who have built superb product lines, superb business models in the transport sector. To discuss where transport is going and where the next opportunities are, I'm very proud to invite on the stage Nicolas Brusson, CEO of BlaBlaCar out of France, and now in many places. Vincent, who is now at Lyft as VP of Engineering, working on the autonomous transport of the future. And one of the things you may not know about Luke is he's the guy behind Google Street View, which started as one of his 20% projects. And from Karim, co-founder, managing director, Magnus Olsson. Welcome. So we're going to talk about where the opportunities are now and where they're going. But for people who don't know enough about your business, just in a couple of minutes, tell us, first of all, the BlaBlaCar story, what BlaBlaCar's mission is, how complicated it was to get to the success that you are now, and where you see the next opportunities. Nicolas.
Yeah, so maybe let's start with the beginning. We started the company about 10 years ago on a pretty basic concept, which was how do we optimize people traveling between cities with cars in Europe, and more specifically in France, where we started. So what we do in very basic terms, we allow drivers that drive between cities in Europe and now in different countries in the world to share their car as they go from Paris to Brussels, from Munich to Berlin, essentially from city to city in pretty long distances. So when we started that 10 years ago, it was kind of interesting because there was like a massive disbelief in the model and in the fact it would work. So we pitched that for the first time in early 2007, so roughly 10 years ago. And people were like, well guys, it's hitchhiking online, and people don't do hitchhiking, that's something from the 60s and 70s, and it's never going to work. So it's 2007, just go get a job in private equity and things are going to be fine. So it took us a long time essentially to connect between this very basic concept and investors and the market. We had the first employee in 2009, so 3 years later, right? So we had 3 years like no employee, essentially just struggling. We had the first seed round in 2010, and we had the first Series A, which really got the company going in December 2011, when Accel Partners actually came on board. And after that, we scaled the model. The sharing economy became a thing as well, with the like of Airbnb and other companies. So suddenly it became interesting because that wacky concept from 2007 became in 2012 sharing economy and Airbnb for cars in a way. So then it started to scale, and today, to give you a sense of scale, it's about 50 million members on the platform. We operate in over 22 countries, mostly in Europe, but also in Eastern Europe, Russia, Brazil, which is the newest country we launched, Mexico. So it became a pretty global phenomenon.
But you're also not just now taking people from city to city. You noticed by looking at the data that there was demand for people moving inside the cities.
Yeah, so right now, I would say we had like a long phase expanding the model globally. So we realized it was pretty unusual actually for a French company back in 2010 to say we want to be European and we want to be global. It was not, it was more this Me Too model that Nico and Nicolas mentioned. So now, essentially now that we expanded in all these countries and we have this footprint and over 50 million people and growing, we're focusing back on product. And today we're really solving city to city, and we realize there is an obvious demand for commuting, right? So it's really people going to work every day, and I guess that's something that Luc is going to talk about. And we want to bring the same C2C model to that commuting market in a way, and allow people when they go to work to just share their car with other people going to work. So but purely on the C2C and car sharing model, not on on-demand sort of D2C model. So that's something I guess we can say some of the.
So you built BlaBlaCar to such a stage that more people each quarter are using your network to share cars than are traveling on Eurostar plus British Airways, I think.
Figure this out.
Share some numbers about how many rides are taken.
Yeah, so today, the thing to understand is today we're talking about rides that tend to be on average like 150, 200 miles, right? So in Europe, it's like Paris to Brussels or Berlin to Munich. Today it's over 15 million people with water using the network. So you need to compare that to Eurostar, for example, which is 4, I think, million a quarter, or even like a big airline like British Airways, which do 10 million passengers in a quarter. So obviously we're not an airline, not a train, but if you think of the city-to-city market, you'll be getting one of the biggest transporter, city-to-city, getting close to the like of SNCF or Deutsche Bahn in France or Europe.
So you win because you get a commission for each ride. The driver wins because they get some gas money from the rider, and the rider wins because they get a low-cost ride, often when the bus isn't going.
So the basic concept, and I guess one of the reasons we scaled, I would say quietly, from a regulation point of view, it's all based on cost sharing, right? So the driver is going anyway, so we're talking about the guy who goes from Paris to Brussels with an empty car, and you get 2 or 3 or 4 passengers sharing that cost. So there is no profit made, and no insurance problem, no regulation problem, no tax problem, and that enabled like pretty fast scaling. And then the way we make money, as you say, is we just take a fee on the transaction. And in that sense, very similar to an Airbnb or if a carrying.
So what you built essentially is a trust mechanism. The investors originally didn't believe it was possible, but just as Airbnb and eBay before that, you found a way. So what was the hardest thing in building that mechanism of trust?
No, that's exactly what you described, right? So we often think of it, if you look at the product from the outside, it looks like a travel product. So it's something where as a passenger you go and say, I want to go from A to B, and we're gonna show like all kind of rides going from point A to point B between cities. The reality is we spend probably like 50% of engineering time and product time building trust. Right, so essentially it's how would I trust riding with you? What do I need to know about you and your ratings and your photo and your bank account verification? So we've been building that trust network where today it's kind of interesting because we have like millions of IDs, we have millions of bank accounts, we have millions of information about consumers that now we can leverage to do more and more. So if you think of someone who's using probably BlaBlaCar in France or in Spain today, they would probably have never used it like 4 or 5 years ago. But now, because the brand is pretty well known, so we have the brand effect as well, that you should not forget. So at some point, as you build your brand, people start trusting the brand more than anything else. But also because we've done all this verification and peer-to-peer review and building trust in the community that people now engage, where maybe a few years ago they would not engage. So building trust has been probably the most important thing we've done in the last few years, and also the most defensible, right? Because it takes time to collect, and you're talking about like tens of millions of information about members you collect slowly over time. So today we have tens and tens of millions of peer review of people that actually spend 3 or 4 hours together in a car, which is very unusual. Like if you think of even Airbnb, you don't spend a lot of time with the host, actually. You tend to rent the entire apartment. Here you're talking about like billions of hours of people connection.
Now Luke is trying to take this to the next level where you don't even need a driver to trust. So you are leading the efforts at Lyft, a gigantic and very fast-growing American transportation mobility company. You're leading the efforts on autonomy. Explain what you do day by day and what you're building.
Well, I should talk about Lyft first. I think Lyft is much like BlaBlaCar, transportation as a service company. I think we build a business around having people do what their parents told them never to do, which is get in a car with a stranger. Right? And I think again, like trust is critical. So Lyft in numbers also is an order of over a million rides a day in the US alone. It's about 6 billion revenue, so it's a very large established company now. What I do there is lead the marketplace team, which includes our mapping efforts as well as the autonomous piece, which we're growing. For us, we believe the future of transportation, is on demand, it's shared, like BlaBlaCar Korea, and it's autonomous. The key here is to eventually be able to bring costs down even further, to get everybody to use it because it makes so much sense economically. So if you can bring that cost even lower by, essentially in most cases not having a driver in the car, then we have a fantastic platform to be better product. So the goal of Lyft is not to be a taxi company. It's really to be your car service that you use and you don't have a car.
So you come to this with an unusual portfolio of experience, PhD in computer vision, pretty key role at Google in coming up with Street View and then rolling it out. How long until we are riding the autonomous lift between any city that we want?
That's the million-dollar question. Nobody really knows. We have guesses. I think it's going to, you'll see a few soon, right? So say a matter of, a couple or 3 years maybe. You'll see some even earlier with safety drivers. I think the transition will be gradual. Right? I think because Lyft has a network already, has say the order of close to 1 million drivers. We can start deploying these cars in our network autonomously in more constrained environments. So, for example, we know what rides are very popular, what routes are very popular, and we know which ones are easier for autonomous cars. So we can start deploying this tech slowly, get value from it, and then go from there. So my sense is that for quite a while, maybe for the longest time, we will have a hybrid network with autonomous cars, being kind of the backbone perhaps, and then with the difficult routes, the spikes in demand being taken care of by drivers, right? Much like in your example, the robot was falling, was not actually doing a great job. We believe there's always going to be a role for humans.
And is the barrier to rapid adoption of this technology regulatory, or is it the technology, or is it customer appetite?
I would say it's the tech still. The tech is still immature. Regulations have been surprisingly pro, autonomous cars in the US. And there's a sense that indeed they will, this technology will reduce fatalities on the road. So it should be beneficial for everybody. But the tech is hard. The tech is immature. The tech isn't able to do everything. So I think we are going to see slow deployments of autonomous vehicles in constrained environments in the coming months and years, and eventually mass adoption after that. So it's going to take probably 10 years for this to be really mainstream.
And one of the things Lyft is effective at doing is monitoring usage patterns and then creating a kind of semi-bus line.
That's right. So we launched a product called Shuttle about 6 months ago in a few cities. And you're absolutely right. The notion is to bring the bus-like experience by understanding usage patterns extremely well. So you can imagine these bus-like, routes becoming eventually the playground for autonomous vehicles. So for sure, maybe the first area we deploy.
So I can think of a whole list of existing industries that are going to be disrupted, from the car manufacturer selling the car, you don't need to buy the car, to the transportation networks providing bus lines.
That's right. So I think the future will, in 10 years, it will be completely different. If you look at the cost of a car today in the US, it's on the order of $9,000 per year. So it costs you in insurance, of course, in lease, in fuel, in parking, in service. All this sort of goes away if you are, able to provide a much better service, right? And so this means that fewer cars are needed, less parking, less, the whole thing will change. So your cities will change.
So I'm sure the audience here knows quite a bit about Karim, huge success story with local heart. Magnus, you don't seem to be from this region. I think you're Swedish. I think there's a rumor that you moved to this neighborhood after meeting an Arabic princess on a tour bus in Tanzania.
True.
which shows that the entrepreneur's motivation is not always financial. I mean, bearing in mind, I think most people know a bit about Kareem. Tell us where you are and where you hope to get next.
So, I think I cannot talk about Kareem without doing the pitch for the region, and I think most people in the audience are already believers, but allow me to do the region pitch as part of where we are and where we're going.
Can you do it in Arabic?
اسمي ماجنس وأنا أطبخ شركة كريم. شركة كريم هذا برنامج في الهاتف مع سائق خاص. طيب. So I seem to be the only non-French guy in the transportation sector, right? So first of all, we started Kareem a bit more than 5 years ago because we wanted to do something meaningful and big. In my case, I had just survived the brain bleeding and got on realized that life is short and I need to find my purpose. We looked for purpose, and transportation showed up as an opportunity. And the future of transportation is going to be in emerging markets. Why? Look at the region. We define our region from Morocco to Pakistan, including Turkey. 700 million people. Average age is 25. Smartphone penetration is at 40%, higher than China. And if you look at car ownership, it's super low. We don't have the legacy infrastructure that we have in the developed world. I'm from Stockholm. We have buses, we have trains, we have trams, we have metros, we have everything. So the sort of ride-hailing play is a relatively marginalized play. In this region, we are effectively in the business of crowdsourcing public transport infrastructure. There is an enormous need of transportation. You know, whether you are in Egypt and traffic is horrendous, whether you're in Pakistan and you care about safety, or you're in Saudi Arabia where until, inshallah, 6 months from now, women don't drive. Just as a small factoid, the government of Saudi Arabia estimates that about 3 million Saudi female are not working today because they don't have a way to get to and from work. If they just had a way to get to and from work, an additional 3 million Saudi female would enter the workforce. So that's a huge need and a huge opportunity. So we're not going in and disrupting anything. We're just enabling people that are underserved. And at the same time, unemployment is high in the region, particularly youth unemployment. So creating jobs or opportunities to make an income, whether they are driving people, pooling people, delivering goods, the need is massive as well to create these jobs. So I think that's why it's going to be super exciting to see the future of transportation in the region, because much like the developing world leapfrogged in the telecom space and skipped fixed telephony and went directly to mobile, or they skipped Visa and MasterCard and went directly to mobile wallets, like we heard in the previous panel, I think that the region, why are we even going to go down the ownership route? Why? Right? So it definitely, we will not have ownership. Definitely, it will be in partnership with the public sector, because we'll have to crowdsource these things together. Imagine if you're in a government, you're a government of Pakistan. You have a $40 billion budget. 10 billion is going to defense, 10 billion is going to finance loans. The rest you're going to serve your public with, 200 million people. You don't have the funds to build transport infrastructure. A company like Kareem, we can go in, there's enough people in society that can afford to buy 1 car or 2 cars or 5 cars, and they put them to work for Kareem. And it's not necessarily the same guy that can buy the car that will drive. We source a captain from some other place. We put them together, and we have essentially created a public transport infrastructure without the government spending a dollar. And then, because it's now digital, it's very easy for them to start gaining some tax dollars on this over time as well, even further supporting the government. So this is all super, super, super exciting. Now, where are we going with Kareem? I think we talk about this region, and we're super excited about the region. And then every investor pitch we do, we talk about the region. Now, in reality, there is not really a region. There's a bunch of countries, and they're quite different. And the cool thing is, a place like Dubai is definitely going to be one of the cities in the world that is going to have autonomous electric vehicles on scale among the first ones. Why? Because the road infrastructure is very modern. We have capital, and we have the regulatory power and vision to make it happen. So that's super exciting. So I think some of the technology that Luke and the guys are building, or other players around the world are building, I think Dubai is going to be an amazing, literally sandbox to play around at, because this is here, all the ingredients are here to make it happen, including the weather. It's a bit hot in the summer, but you don't have to worry about rain or snow or these type of conditions.
Nice.
Right? Now, in other parts of the region, I think that transition is going to take a bit longer. And there is also need to, the need for job creation is so large that I think we're going to see, and the availability of very cheap vehicles. I mean, in Egypt, we are doing three-wheelers or tuk-tuks. In Pakistan, a few weeks ago, we launched two-wheelers. If you have a super traffic congested city, anyone would be happy to jump on the back of a two-wheeler if it can take you can cut your transport time 5x, right? So we're looking at a lot of these things, and the broad sort of priority for us is how can we make transportation more affordable? How can we get more people into the same car? How can we use potentially different type of vehicles that can transport more people at the same time? A bit like, I mean, you talked about pooling, Luke, and Nicolas as well. We invested in a company in Egypt called Swivel that is doing sort of the daily commuter use case in minibuses, 7-seater, 14-seater, 30-seaters. If you're going from one part of Cairo to the other part of Cairo, it's a 3-hour journey. Of course you should share it. It doesn't make any sense not to share it. But then there is also, like was said on the previous panel, there is a lot of local context. If you're in 50-degree weather in the Gulf, you probably need to have a transport solution that takes you door to door. Because walking even for 5 minutes outside in the summer is probably not feasible. But if you're in Egypt, where weather is a bit more mild and traffic is horrendous, you probably will be happy to walk for 3 minutes to the right block because you will save 10 minutes of the ride, right? So it's all about being local, and it's all about making it affordable and convenient for people.
And how much are you using the data that you're gathering from all these journeys to plan new services?
So we're collecting a lot of data. And this goes for all of us, right? It's so sort of astronomical in size that it's even hard to wrap our head around it sometimes. And this data can tell us, obviously, what's the optimal allocation of cars? How do we predict demand and supply? How do we move around cars even before things happen? How do we best route passengers and put them together, etc. So we're using all that data. The more the larger we become, the more advanced use can we make of this data, and the more it can tell us.
Give us
if you look
a
at
couple of specifics that you could do, and then I'm going to ask Luke, who's looking at this in great detail now.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately no one wakes up in the morning and say, hey, I want to use a transportation service. Transportation is almost the definition of a transaction cost. It's like a waste. Who wants to go around and be like, I wake up, what should you do today? I'm going to transport myself. It's like, no. So you want to make that as completely frictionless as possible. Meaning, how can we advise our customers what time of the day is the best time to take the ride when the traffic is lower? And that will also reflect in the price, obviously, because you have less waiting time or there's more supply available. So basically creating a more smooth, we call it marketplace, but a more smooth ecosystem where the utilization of, ultimately it's a utilization game. So how can you utilize the assets, the vehicles, in the most optimal way for both sort of optimized time and speed. But then in the future, not even future, some of this is happening already in other parts of the world where this type of data can be used, for example, to inform traffic lights or street planning. How should you optimize your road? What should the next road you build be? What should be the next residential neighborhood be based on how traffic patterns look?
So Luke, you are addressing exabytes, petabytes of data. We can guess, I think, what's going to happen with that data in the short term, matching the customer with the driver more efficiently. helping the car know what's around it. But where does this go to the next level?
So first of all, on the data side, yes, we're collecting lots of data, Kareem and Lyft and BlaBlaCar, but it's still sort of not that much compared to the world I come in, which is Street View, where a car driving for a whole day was collecting multiple terabytes of data per car. So here we're talking about maybe at most, at Lyft, petabytes of data. That data, as Magnus said, is used to essentially give our users a better service, predict usage pattern, understand supply and demand, and understand traffic, do a better job matching passengers, on rides. Going forward, the way I see it, our business is based on really understanding the physical world, to a very, very granular degree. What are good pickup points? Where do we tell you to go when you request a car, say from this hotel, from this room? How should you, walk to a good pickup point? What are, how many lanes on that road? What should you, if a driver in that left lane, will they be able to take a right at the next one to pick up some passenger or not? So a whole bunch of things require knowledge that's very, very detailed. And only what you really get to this knowledge is through sort of eyes on the road. So we believe that, more and more of our cars over time will have, camera type systems to help us collect that data and build better map, for our service and eventually for autonomous cars as well. So there we're talking about a lot of data, very quickly, petabytes, and they will be piling up.
When you started Street View, there was no business model. It was, let's just get as much data from the physical world as possible. How did the thinking evolve towards something that could actually earn Google a fair amount of money?
That's a very good question. So I think Google was all about essentially bringing the web to users. And when we started Street View, we said, well, how about trying to bring the physical world to users, right? It was about creating that, virtual reality environment, right? It was a VR project. Over time, as we scaled and scaled usage and saw that there were hundreds of millions of users around the world for this product, we also started thinking about evolving use cases for the data we had, and we were able to run early experiment with deep learning to extract information from the imagery. So the first example had to do with house numbers. We were able to find house numbers at scale from the imagery. And why is that important? Because if you can recognize house numbers, then you can geocode addresses. So if somebody looks for an address, we can take them straight to that exact address because we know exactly where the picture was taken. That use case grew, and eventually today, probably most of Google's maps are derived from imagery, right? So mostly automatically, but still, with human in the loop on occasion. We believe that same approach, is even more applicable to a world of, AVs, autonomous vehicles. They need to know the environment to a very, very granular degree. Where are the curbs, where are the traffic lights, where are the signs? So that can be provided to imagery.
So I want to give the room a chance to ask questions. Whilst you're thinking about your question, I just want to ask each of you a very quick question. So based on what we've heard and based on your own knowledge of where the market's going, if you were an investor in this sector, where would you see the opportunities that could bring a really good financial return in the next decade?
Should I start?
You can start.
Well, I think we all agree. I mean, one theme you hear around the table here is the future is going to be around the car. And it's funny because it's always been around the car, right? So one stat, actually, one piece of data that's interesting in Europe, but it's true all over the world, is if you look at the trips we serve, so typically they're like 50 kilometers to 800 kilometers, 75% of that today in France, in Germany, all over Europe is done by car. It's just typically like one or two guys in the car, so it's highly inefficient, but it's done by car. And the main reason it's done by car, it's not so much a reason of cost and so on, it's purely convenience because the car is point to point, right? So the reason most people take a car, it's because it's a pain to go to the train station and take like a metro and a tram or a taxi and they go garage to garage or really door to door. And So clearly it's going to be around the car, and the car is going to become autonomous. So it's not for us to create autonomous cars. I think other people are going to solve that. Maybe it's Lyft, maybe it's car manufacturers, maybe it's Tesla. We're not going to build cars. But the other thing that's super interesting is it's going to be shared, right? So clearly it's going to make no sense to have like one person per car, unless you can afford it. But most of these cars, they're going to become cars, minibus, whatever, like vehicles that are going to be shared. And the game is going to be mostly around data and search intent, and to understand like what people really want to do, and how do you pull 2, 3, 4, 5 people into a car. So I would say whoever is playing in that upper layer of collecting search intent, understanding data, understanding user, country by country or globally, is probably going to win. Because they're not going to run like a big asset, rich company. It's going to be pretty light, but they're going to gather like all the consumer intents essentially.
And it sounds like also some solution that offers multimodal transport information.
Yep.
One of Klaus's companies, Go Euro, is attempting to link up the train and the bus and the private transport.
Yep.
Okay. Magnus, what is the trillion-dollar financial opportunity in all this?
So the trillion-dollar financial opportunity is consumer spending in the broader Middle East is about $1.8 trillion today. And about 2% of that is online. In 2030, with conservative estimates, that 1.8 trillion is going to be closer to $3 trillion. And if you look at where China is today, about close to 20% of consumer spend has moved online. And we should be able to achieve that in the region in 10 years, or 13 years. So then you have $500 billion annual spend, consumer spend online in the region. That's the $1 trillion opportunity. So it's in the region. Now transportation is going to be one big part of that, so that's why we are excited. But that's the $1 trillion question.
Cool.
Well, so the US market that Lyft operates in right now, we estimate is about $2 trillion, US alone. So that's the market we're going after. We have, on the order of 0.2, 0.3% of that market right now. So I think the opportunity is definitely there. And of course, and there's international. So I think I think Lyft, much like Careem and BlaBlaCar, is kind of a marketplace with network effects. So I think it's very well positioned to disproportionately benefit from new users and new drivers, because any new user or new driver make the whole system better. They don't bring just more revenue, they also make the whole system better because you can lower ETAs. The main metrics that we look at Lyft are ETA. So when you request a car, how much time does it take for the car to get to you? We aim for like sub 3 minutes. You can only get to that if you have enough density of service where you operate. And that's also why Lyft has been very focused on the US market alone for now, because we need that density to give a great service. Eventually we'll expand beyond the US, but I think we are well positioned right now to sort of eventually win the US.
No announcements to make today then?
No announcements to make today, no.
Questions from the room? Gentleman over here, there's a microphone driving towards you.
So, all the three companies here are disruptors, right? And you're disrupting existing industries. Are you concerned about getting disrupted yourselves in the future? And how do you hedge or protect against future disruption?
Can I do a quick response? I actually disagree in the case of Careem. And it's my strong view that in the region, if you want to be a sexy tech company in the Silicon Valley, you need to disrupt something, whether it's transportation or food or laundry or whatever it is, you need to disrupt something. In this part of the world, there's a lot of infrastructure that has not yet been built and a lot of services that have not yet been built. I think 90% of our customers in Saudi Arabia did not use taxis before, for cultural reasons, for safety reasons, for convenience reasons. So I actually do not see us as a disruptor. So that's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer, am I worried about someone disrupting Careem? Of course I am. It keeps us up at night all the time. And we're constantly looking at, how can we do things better, and how can we place strategic bets in opportunities or in other players that are doing something great. For example, Swivel in Egypt. that does the bus transportation.
I mean, my take on this that Lyft indeed could be disrupted by what? By AVs. If somebody was able to create an autonomous network, at scale that would operate and be, much less expensive than operating a network of vehicles driven by people, then we could be disrupted. So that's very much why we're investing so heavily in autonomous tech right now.
Couple more quick questions. Was there another hand over here? There's a hand just over here.
So many drivers you see are drivers for both Lyft and Uber. So my question to you is, how do you ensure loyalty of the drivers to one particular service?
That's a very good question. I don't think that's a question that either Uber or Lyft has answered very well yet. I think I think Lyft tends to do a better job than Uber, and we find in some anecdotes I've seen, we find more drivers that are staying 100% with Lyft than drivers that are staying 100% with Uber because of various incentives we have to keep it on the platform, because they feel treated better as a driver. Ultimately, I think we want to find ways for these drivers to be able to make a good living driving, full-time for one platform, so they don't have to switch anymore and do all this juggling between apps that we see. But honestly, we haven't found that the exact answer to that question quite yet. And drivers they are contractors, so they do whatever they want. We don't control them. Yeah.
Last question from me. Are we in a world where there's only room for one monopolist operator in each territory? Is it a question of the small guys getting wiped out, which seems to have been the pattern so far?
I would say no. So, I can start with my own perspective on this. I think there will at least be two, per region. And just like, with airlines, there's just not one single airline. First of all, the market is, very regional, right? So there will always be regional players that know their market super well, like Kareem knows this area, like the back of their hand. So they can operate better than, maybe a big multinational, potentially. And then, people want to have a choice. So I think there will probably be multiple players in each region in the future. Look at a market like New York. It's also so dense that it's the only market I know of where we see so many successful players, like 4 or 5, and the taxis are still actually competitive there.
For the moment, maybe, though.
For the moment.
Is there only ever going to be one BlaBlaCar, or are you finding competition in some territories?
Yeah, I think you have two things. You have what Luc is saying, so you're going to have probably like a few, not many, but a few per region, maybe not just one. And then you need to think of like what people do and the type of trips they do. And today it's not the same operators doing long distance and short distance, and it's never been the same. And there is no reason it's going to be the same in the future either, right? So I don't think people. I'll share a funny story, but for a long time people asked us like, okay, is Uber going to come and eat your lunch doing long distance? And in 2014, when Index invested, that was one of the big questions, like, is Uber going to do that? And back then, I was an angel investor in Deliveroo that was doing food delivery, and Index was also investing in Deliveroo. And I was like, well, maybe you should be worried about food delivery because, from a DNA point of view, to me, it makes a lot more sense for Uber to do food delivery than to do long distance ride sharing on a C2C model, and which is not even on demand because you don't book your Paris to Brussels on demand. You book that, it's scheduled, something you plan like a couple of days in advance. And Uber moved into food delivery, never moved into our space. And Lyft actually started doing what we were doing. It's called Zimride. And when I met John and Logan actually in the early days, we were like, okay, if one day we compete, we've done well. And in fact, Zimride became Lyft. I think you know that story. Yep. And BlaBlaCar expanded. So I think you'll see for different sectors in transport, maybe different players, because you're not solving for the same consumer need. And the fact that we launched like a new app, completely new app for BlaBla lines to target commuting was because of that. Because we realized BlaBlaCar was not the right product for commuting. We had to build another product.
And is Kareem prevented from expanding in other territories because you're too late and there's already a dominant player that has a moat around it?
I think there's definitely network effects. The network effects are largely city-specific. Because if I have a lot more cars in Stockholm, it doesn't really impact my service levels in Riyadh, right? So there is definitely, if you're late to the game, it's expensive to catch up, to get to a minimum level of scale in the city that your service is at least usable. But I don't think it's impossible. I think this is going to be a multi-inning game.
So the autonomous camels are waiting for our speakers to take them home. I just have to thank Magnus Olsson, Luc Vincent, and Nick Brusson very much for sharing their knowledge.
Thank you.